Quotations from myself, segment 17. Quotation number 200. The opponents of the capital punishment are trying to present their disagreement, with the proponents of it as a conflict between rationality and emotionality. Yet such an artificially created dichotomy is not only false, since the opposite of rational is irrational, and irrational and emotional are not synonymous, but also blatantly self-serving in allowing the opponents of capital punishment to assume a priori to any discussion the position of intellectual superiority, setting themselves up as impartial judges confronted by the bent-on revenge, bloodthirsty mob clamoring for death penalty. To begin with, being emotional does not prevent one from being rational, and vice versa. Far from being mutually exclusive, rationality and emotionality are in fact inseparable attributes of men who are both rational and emotional at the same time, constantly rationalizing their emotions and getting emotional as a result of rationalizing. Moreover, human emotions are not only the starting point, but also the product and integral part of thinking, as thinking is essentially a rational activity regardless of its end results. Thus, unless proven otherwise, we will have to accept that the opponents of the capital punishment are no less emotional and no more rational than those in favor of it. And I personally have not seen yet any scientific proof that a professor of sociology or a member of the clergy were less emotional or more rational than an ordinary housewife. In any event, even if the previous arguments were not convincing enough, this last one should be. In the face of death, we are all equal, none is more qualified than the other, and no amount of statistical data or legal opinions, expressed by the way mostly by defense lawyers who have vested interest in legal proceedings to go on indefinitely, can refute the simple truth, especially when most of statistical data in our rapidly changing world are becoming obsolete by the time they are collected and analyzed. Furthermore, despite this heavy reliance on statistics, the opponents of the capital punishment would not deny that their objection to it is a product of the abhorrence, clearly an emotional state, of killing a human being, even if it's done by government and not by individual. They also invoke, once in a while, the notion of forgiveness, again in purely emotional state. But as far as forgiving is concerned, only those who have suffered personally have the right to forgive. Only those who had anguished, who had been tortured, humiliated, and stripped of human dignity, who had experienced hell by being still alive, who was killed, have the right to forgive. Not the sociologists, not the criminologists, not the pseudo-Christian hypocrites, mesmerized by their own goodness, not even parents and children, brother and sister, only the victims themselves. I wish God were alive today as in the time of a prophet. He would hear then the cries of innocent tortured and slaughtered and strike the guilty with all his might. Are you people deaf that you don't hear the cry of those who are suffering? Are you blind that you don't see the blood of those who are being killed? Are your hearts made of stone that you don't feel their anguish and horror? Number 201. Young animals learn how to survive by imitating the behavior of their parents. This is the only way they can learn, since they lack language and cannot ask questions and receive answers. Young humans also imitate their parents, but most of imitating goes on in an early stage of development. As soon as a child is able to speak, the main mode of learning became the questioning by the child and answering by the parent or anybody else for that matter. Correct answers to a child's questions are extremely important for a child's survival in the present, especially in the future, when there will be no parents to protect it. Just imagine for a moment a consequence of a wrong answer when the child asks if people can drink gasoline. Thus, it is essential for a child's well-being that the answer to its question are as truthful as possible. And children are known for their instinctive, insatiable quest for truth because they, by previous experience, either know or suspect what the lies can do to them. Fortunately, for both the child and the parent, the questions at this stage of a child development are mostly of physical nature, for example, about properties of things around them. And the question of this kind could be answered given the knowledge correctly and unequivocally, unlike the question of the moral, ethical, political, or other nature, which the child as it grows up to become an adult will have to confront himself and eventually find his own answers, since majority of the parents can offer little help in this matter. And then the child will have to live with consequences of these answers for the rest of his life. Number 202. Identifications versus definitions. Why is it so easy, relatively speaking, to identify the things and events, but so difficult to define them? Identification is more broad and flexible. It allows variation and nuances. Definition, on the other hand, tend to be narrow and rigid, excluding a lot of things and events belonging to the wider class. Definition try to indicate precisely the point in the continuum, where white, for example, turns into gray or gray into black. Definitions deal with the discrete, identification with the continuous. Both definitions and identifications go hand in hand, helping us in our interaction with the world. The definitions give us structure and order, without which the world would be too chaotic to deal with. The identification gives us freedom and flexibility to confront multiformity of things and events in order to survive. Number 203. If you really want to know what people like or dislike, and especially what they feel is good or bad for them personally, do not pay too much attention to what they say. Look at what they do. Take, for example, wives and mothers. The majority of them would say they are the victim or at least the losing partner in the marriage, burdened with disproportionate amount of responsibility and obligations in the family, while the husbands enjoy the undeserved privileges by taking advantage of their dominant position in the marriage. Let us also keep in mind that parents in general, and mothers in particular, want what is best for their children. And evidently, their notion of what is best is based on their own experience. Thus, we can safely assume that what mothers think is good for their children must also be what they think is good for themselves. And now let us take a look at how they behave when trying to direct the life of their sons and daughters. Mothers, with very few exceptions, desperately want their daughter to marry as soon as possible, though they would rarely admit it even to themselves. Now, if marriage is such a tragedy to a woman, do they really want their daughters to suffer? Hardly. At the same time, they usually want their sons to marry as late as possible. But if the marriage is such a good thing for a man, why would mother want to deny their son, whom they obviously love as much, if not sometimes more than the daughters, and wish all the best in the world for them, to deny them all its privileges?